With all my strength and courage, I could not get over what happened to me that fateful night. It was a natural beginning. I had no impression that anything was going to happen. I was in my own room, watching TV and eating my dinner. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The air got really cold, and the air conditioner stopped flowing. I knew the electricity had gone out, but I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. That I heard strange sounds, voices the likes of which I had never heard before. It was like the screams of ghosts, and sometimes I could hear the flapping of wings. And when I looked out the window, I saw strange things moving in the dark. They were hovering around the house, like supernatural beings ready to attack me. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing and thought I was imagining or faking it as a result of exhaustion and fatigue. But things became clearer, and I couldn't ignore them. I began to feel fear and terror, and began to hear voices more distinctly, and suddenly, a strange thing appeared at the window. There was a face looking at me, but it was not a human face. It was like a black shadow with only a strange head and eyes the likes of which I had never seen before, and it was looking at me with eyes as red as fire. I was terrified of the strange face looking at me from the window. I didn't know what to do, so I staggered in place, the air turning very cold and the terrifying sound from outside getting louder. I started to feel tight and suffocated, as if the place was getting narrower and less safe. There was a growling sound outside, a sound like the cries of demons and the voices of evil spirits. I could not move or get out of the house despite my attempts to get up and escape, but I was as if someone had tied me with tight ropes. Well, ideas began to flow in my head. Is this true? Is this weird face actually watching me? Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from the door, their sound like that of a wild animal approaching its prey. It was like the sound of wild animal breathing. I was not prepared for what would happen. I began to encourage myself to get up and run away, or at least do something for myself. But as I moved to open the door, a cloud of black mist engulfed my room, shifting through the mist, and fell to the floor, as if trying to hold me. Then I heard a strong sound that was like a rock falling from above to the ground. It was the sound of an explosion. At this moment, I felt that my heart had completely stopped beating. It was a few seconds. I thought I was done. I waited for what would happen after this, but I no longer saw or heard anything. Suddenly, that dark mist returned, and there was a demonic breeze sending it, bringing sensations that I didn't understand. I only felt them. There was no escaping the darkness that surrounded me and blocked my vision. The mist was moving very slowly, as if it really wanted to get hold of something. I had no idea what was going on, but I felt that something serious was going on and I needed to escape as soon as possible. I tried to reach the door, but the fog was getting thicker, and it was hard to see anything. However, I heard voices from outside, voices that were almost human, but distorted and terrifying. They were like startled screams, the voices of ghosts trying to communicate. As time passed, the voices began to fade, the mist began to dissipate as well, and when it all cleared up, I found myself in the center of the room, shrouded in pitch darkness. Tonight was the worst night ever, and I was feeling so scared and terrified. Those sounds and the complete darkness were evidence of something unnatural moving about in the house. There was nothing I could do, so I had to sit in the dark, waiting for what would come next. I sat in the dark, leaning against the wall, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence all around was frightening, and there was no sound to be heard. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I sensed something wasn't quite right. At that time, I began to hear a growing voice outside, a voice as if approaching me. It sounded like ghosts moaning, and sometimes it drove me crazy. The sounds got louder and louder until the walls began to shake. I couldn't take that sound any longer, it was so terrifying, so I decided to look out the window to see what was going on. When I looked out the window, dread gripped me, for what I saw was more terrifying than I had expected. I saw a strange object, moving in the dark. There were sparkling red eyes, and his figure was very frightening. He was bigger than a cat, close in size to an ape, but not much like a shape, the like of which I had never seen. He was moving slowly towards the house, and the closer he got, the greater the terror that gripped me. Suddenly, the being came to the window, and started screaming loudly, as if it was trying to get into the house. The window was shaking, and I realized he was trying to sneak into the house. That I was terrified, as this was the worst moment of my life. I didn't know how to act, but I had to do something. So, I decided to run away from home and find another place where I could hide. That I opened the door of the room very slowly, while I was in a hurry, and when I approached the door of the house, I retreated for fear that he would come through the door or pursue me in that damned atmosphere, but I continued and left quickly. It was very cold, the cold air was hitting my face. In my neighborhood there was a coffee shop near my house. Ronnie moved quickly, and all I wanted was to be away from home. I could sense that something dangerous was following me. But I kept running, and when I got to the coffee shop, I went in to take a break. When the young man working in the cafe saw me, he asked me, "Are you okay?" I did not know what I looked like, but I understood from his question that there was terror on my face. I didn't dare to talk to him, I didn't feel comfortable with him, and I decided not to say anything. I just told him nothing. I was running away from the rain and freezing cold outside. Although there was no rain and not even my clothes were wet, he moved his head and said to you, even though he was still staring at my fearful features, and left me and went. Thoughts were flowing in my head, and terror was creeping into me. I began to say to myself why I didn't tell him, why didn't I tell him my story, perhaps he would help me. But I hesitated for fear of scaring him because there was no one at the time. I closed my eyes and didn't know what would happen next. Therefore, I decided to call the police and report what happened, and then I hesitated, so I said to myself that I should go to them so that it would not become clear that I had fled from my house. So I got up and went to my car and went to the police station to tell them what happened. When I entered and told them and started with what happened to me until I started telling the policeman when I fled to the coffee shop. And here was the shock that struck me after I had begun to feel comfortable. The policeman told me that the cafe closes at exactly 12 o'clock at night. Then I remembered that what he said was true, because it is in the same neighborhood as me, and I always see it closed. When I ran away, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Fear and terror returned to me, and I remembered the young man who spoke to me and how his looks were. With fear and conflicting thoughts in my head, then I slept with the police because I could not go out because of the fear inside me, and the next day, I went home to find out what happened, and there was an investigator in the police station with me, but there was nothing abnormal in the house, and everything was as it was. I didn't know what happened that night, but I was grateful that I had miraculously escaped that horrible creature. The investigator began to inspect the house and the window. Perhaps he might get something from the effect of that damned demon, but as I said, everything was as it was. Then the investigator went and asked me not to hesitate to call in case anything happened. And I thanked him. That I sat in my room and it was 11 o'clock in the afternoon, and he began to look at the window and remember. What happened? I was terrified and very afraid, but not like at night. Time was running fast and I didn't want the night to come until I no longer felt myself, except that I fell asleep and went into a deep sleep. I only felt myself when an acquaintance called me. That time, I looked at the clock, it was 4 in the afternoon. I was about to leave my house and came back in the evening. I entered my room. I began to feel terror and fear everywhere, and I did not feel safe at home or outside. Thoughts were running through my head, trying hard to think of a way to overcome this horror. That I began to search for the reasons that might be behind that terrifying night, and after searching and investigating, I came to the conclusion that the house had been built on a cursed land, and that this strange being was part of that curse. After that, I decided to take drastic action to get rid of this curse. So I started cleaning the house and removing anything that could be causing negative energy. And I added more lights and green plants to improve the energy inside the house. After weeks of cleaning the house and improving the energy inside, I felt that the terror was gradually fading away, and that I could enjoy life again. I was feeling thankful for surviving this terrifying nightmare, and now I know that positive energy and optimism are the keys to overcoming terror and fear. After the terrifying incident at home, I decided to completely change my life, because I realized that life is short and we cannot predict what will happen in the future. I decided to work on improving my lifestyle and enjoy every moment. That I started practicing meditation, yoga and healthy nutrition, and I used to go to nature and quiet places to relax and enjoy the fresh air. I was also spending time with friends and family, and had goals and dreams for the future. That I realized that life needs a balance between work, relaxation and leisure, and that we should live life to the fullest, including the hard times and the beautiful moments. Once I started focusing on the positive things in life, I started to feel happier and more satisfied. As time passed, I began to forget that horrible night at home, and no longer had any doubts or fears. My life is filled with positive activities and lovely people, and I know I can overcome anything that may come my way. Since then, I have become stronger and more confident in myself, realizing that terror and fear are just challenges that can be overcome if we have the will and self-confidence. Although my life changed dramatically and became happier and more confident, I could not completely forget that terrifying night at home. It was a very terrifying experience, and it always hid in the back of my mind. And one day, fear came into my life again, when I saw that terrifying being in a dream. That night was indescribably terrifying, and nightmares haunted me every moment of the night. That I began to feel anxious and afraid again, and began to wonder if the terrifying creature had come home again. I started to follow the precautionary and security measures, and tried to protect myself in any way possible, but over time, I began to realize that these negative thoughts and fears are of no use, and that they are only harming my life and mental health. I started